Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. Let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another incredible guest. He's a Baylor University School of Law graduate and currently works as the founder and trial lawyer at Snellings PLLC. He's held past positions as the managing member at Burris and Snellings law firm and as an associate at Hartline, Dacus, Barger, and Dreyer, and Kern. Forgot the N there. But finally, he is the host of the Driven Crowd podcast. Excited to have him on the podcast today, Mr. Scott Snellings. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today?
Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
Hey Nate, thanks for having me on, man. Doing fantastic. It's a beautiful morning here in Texas, unlike the cloudy skies that you have behind you right now. And so yeah, all is good.
I know that. I'm trying to bring that energy, that Texas nice weather energy through. I'm trying to get it through the computer right now. It's not really working, but hopefully throughout the podcast, I can feel the heat and the sun, and I feel good about myself. But Scott, before we get started, can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely, Nate. So as you mentioned, I graduated from Baylor. I did undergrad and law school at Baylor. And whenever I graduated, my first job was at a bigger insurance defense firm here in Texas, Hartline, Dacus, and did that for about 4 years doing products liability defense work, which is pretty hardcore. I defended mainly General Motors. And so flying all over the US, I had my platinum status on American Airlines. And man, I was doing really high level stuff as a young lawyer. And I got to learn from some absolutely amazing trial lawyers. After 4 years, I knew everything. And so I decided to quit my good paying job in 2008, the worst economy I'd ever seen, and go start a plaintiff's law firm with another guy in the most conservative county in Texas. And so somehow we managed, and we did that for about almost 9 years. And then we went our separate ways. And I started Snellings Law on September 1st of 2017. And 2 months later, had a kidney transplant. And so we just celebrated our 7th anniversary at the firm. We have 5 attorneys right now, about 15 or 16 in-house. I can't even keep up with it. It seems like we're growing so fast. And then lots of virtual help too. So in a nutshell, that's who I am and kind of where I came from.
Now, I love to hear the growth. Of course, congratulations on the 7 years at the Snellings Law Firm, which we will all get into soon enough. But we have to go all the way back to the wonderful year of 2000. I was negative 3 years old, not to make you feel old. I stopped doing that for a while, but now I'm bringing it back a little bit. Not that people, but it's just something I like doing. I was negative 3 because I could do the math, 2003, it's easy. But you were at Baylor University. You had graduated in 2000, like I said, and then the following year you ended up at the Baylor University School of Law. Now, I do my research, as I always do, and I saw that you had some intentions of actually being a doctor before you decided to become a lawyer. So can you talk about when you were deciding to maybe become a doctor and then deciding to go to law school? So simply put, Scott, why'd you go to law school in the first place?
Yeah, I never wanted to be a lawyer, Nate. I had zero interest in it. In fact, if you'd have asked me, hey, what's your interest level in being a doctor? I would have said negative. Like I have zero interest and even less than zero. It sounds like a terrible occupation. Yeah, I always wanted to be a doctor. My mom had a neck fusion surgery when I was young, and I just remember being in the hospital and being around doctors, and I just thought it was really cool. And I always, medicine always interested me. I got my EMT license in high school, so it was always something that I was super interested in. And then I didn't really decide not to become a doctor. It was decided for me when I made a D in biology my freshman year at Baylor. And so once that decision was made, I didn't know what I was going to do with my life. I was a psychology major. I really liked that. Did not want to be a counselor, and didn't really love any other avenues with that degree. And so it was funny. My dad was out hunting dove. This was the fall of my junior year, and he had on a Baylor t-shirt. And this guy yelled at him. He's like, "Hey, did you go to Baylor?" And my dad said, "No, my son goes there." He's like, "Well, come hunt with me." And they spent the day together. And he told this guy about me. And at the end of the day, he said, "Hey, your son sounds like he's an amazing, amazing young man. And if he wants an internship at my law firm, have him reach out." And that was Cass Casterline, and he was a plaintiff's lawyer in Dallas. And he's the whole reason I ended up going to law school. I did reach out. I had that internship, and his job being a lawyer was totally different than what I pictured. And when I pictured lawyers, I didn't picture the courtroom stuff. I pictured people behind a desk writing motions and looking at insurance policies and all that kind of stuff. Plus, I'd read all the John Grisham novels. I knew, the workloads, right? I knew. And so, yeah, I had zero interest in it. But then whenever I went and I did that internship, I got to see the massive effect that he was able to have on people. One of the cases I worked on was these two little girls were on their way home from the airport, having just been to Disney World with their parents, and they got in a crash with an 18-wheeler, and both parents were killed. And so we worked on that case. We worked on electrocution cases. We worked on so many cases, and I got to see, how much help he provided these people, not just, by giving them a check at the end of the day, but walking them through the process, showing them how things work, and taking that worry and stress and anxiety off their shoulders. And so I was like, I can really see myself doing this. There's the medicine part of it, right? I'm a personal injury lawyer. We deal with a lot of injuries, and understanding, the treatment process and how things heal, and things that go along with different types of injuries. And so I was like, I can really see myself doing that. And so I started studying for the LSAT, and I didn't do great on it. In fact, I applied to several different law schools. I got into two, and Baylor was one of them, obviously, but I got delayed acceptance. And so I bartended for a year after I graduated from undergrad, and ended up going to law school in the summer of 2000.
So would
2000.
would you say, because sometimes guests will have some prior legal internship before going into law school, and you are especially one of those people who had a prior legal internship. Would you say, was that valuable for law school itself, like going through the process, actually going to law school? Would you say that was somewhat valuable, or was it valuable just in the sense of realizing what the legal industry is like, what actually working in the legal field is like?
Yeah, like in terms of, learning the law or anything that was useful in law school, like no. But what it did is it set my career in motion. It showed me that, yeah, hey, this is something that I really want to do. I think a lot of people who want to go to law school have zero idea what it's like. I've had several people that have worked at the firm. In fact, I heard this during our quarterly evaluations. I think it was yesterday. I thought I wanted to go to law school until I worked here, and I see what you guys do and what you go through, and now I just don't want to do that anymore. Which is awesome, right? It's way better to figure that out now than, halfway through law school or 3 years into law school where you have all this debt or you've paid all this money to find out that you don't like to do something. And so I think that having the internship and being in that world was super helpful in confirming, or for me, in, deciding that, hey, wow, I guess I am interested in this.
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful point too, and it's something we love talking about. Of course, it is the tagline of this podcast that there is no straight path, there's only your unique journey. And
Right?
included in that unique journey is figuring out actually if you want to go to law school or not. Because of course, it's not for everyone. And like you said, it is a huge, huge investment just not only in money, of course, money is especially important, but your time as well. That if you're
Yeah.
going through law school, putting all these hours in studying for tests, studying for finals, getting through it all, doing all these internships, and then finding out that, oh, this is actually something I don't want to do is a bit
Yeah.
harrowing. So it's good to figure out what you want to do before you actually go and do it. And getting an internship prior to law school is sometimes valuable for people just like yourself in terms of finding what you want to do and what you don't want to do, which we will get to soon enough. But let's go to the first year of law school. I always love talking about it. Some people hate it, some people love it. I got receipts for it all. But how is it for you, Scott?
Yeah, so law school is just a different beast. There's people who are crazy smart who do awful at law school. There's people who barely get in and crush it. There's people who are really good in law school and they're awful lawyers. There's people who are, barely getting by who are amazing trial lawyers. And so I think law school has a couple of different things, right? The first year, you're learning how to kind of navigate law school, right? So I went to Baylor. We're on the quarter system, and I started in the summer quarter. And I think a lot of law schools are like this. Like you don't have any quizzes, you don't have any tests. There's just a final at the end. So built-in stress right there, right? And the final is one, maybe two questions with a massive fact pattern. And so it's not like you can just rote memorize things. You didn't have to know case names. You had to basically look at a situation and figure out where all the problems could be, and then flesh out those problems. And that's something that I think is innate for a whole lot of people, or for some people, and is really, really hard for others. And so as you go through your first quarter, your first semester of law school, you're learning that skill set a little bit, but it's not necessarily, pointed out to you like, hey, here's how you look at these kinds of things. These, you have your, like if you're talking about negligence, you have your duty, your breach, your proximate cause, and your damages. So you know the four prongs of negligence, but then actually applying those, that does come from case law, and so you're kind of having to pull things out, put them together, and then be able to write. Whenever people ask me, hey, if I want to go to law school, what should I major in undergrad? I always tell people something that requires you to think and write. So whether it's philosophy, history, English, political science, will do a lot of that. It's a huge, huge skill set, because if you can think and then you can write on what you're thinking in a clear manner, then you're probably going to do pretty well in law school.
Yeah, I would have to second that philosophy major because I myself am a philosophy major, and I'll tell you what, that there's a lot of writing going on, a lot of
Yeah.
writing going on, especially sort of the test settings. I don't know what it is at other schools, but at least at the University of Albany, most philosophy tests are usually blue books. You get a bunch of questions. Sometimes you get them in advance so you could prepare a little bit, but it's just an hour and 20 minutes straight of just writing, writing, writing of all these, huge philosophical ideas that you sort of got to break down. You got to make your own arguments. So I felt it's very useful for sort of thinking and writing on your feet, being able to get all those ideas on the page. And usually for myself, I'm memorizing everything that I possibly can, and then I'm vomiting it on the page. But it is very useful for that quick thinking, like you said. Now, going throughout law school, we'll finally talk about the significance of knowing what you do want to do, but also finding out what you don't want to do, which is especially important. So, throughout law school, with any internships, clerkships that you ever did you ever figure out what you wanted to do with the law in terms of specialization, but as well, especially find out what you didn't want to do with the law?
Yeah. I wanted to do personal injury and I didn't want to do anything else. If personal injury ever went away, I probably wouldn't practice law. That's where my heart is. That's what I'm passionate about, and I really couldn't care less to practice anything else. So for me, it was pretty easy. Personal injury is what made me want to go to law school. If I had had an internship doing, real estate or insurance coverage or appellate work, I wouldn't have gone to law school. But none of those things really interest me. Certain aspects of different areas interest me. The trial work in criminal law, estate planning. There's a lot of strategy there. I wouldn't want to do that day in and day out. And so for me, that wasn't really a thought process of what do I want to do. I already knew, and it was just confirmed. I did really well in my torts classes. We had practice court at Baylor and did well at that, and just confirmed that, hey, that's really what I want to do. And one of the things that I'm going to brag on Baylor for a minute, one of the things that they do, sick and bears, is every student that graduates from Baylor Law School goes through practice court. And it's heavy procedure, Texas procedure. And your first quarter of practice court, you go and you have 3 mini trials. And so you stand up, you do voir dire, you do opening, you do a direct, a cross, and a close. You do that 3 different times. And then your second quarter, you have a case. You get a case file. You have to file a petition or an answer, depending on what side you're on. You do written discovery. You take depositions, and then you go try your case. You have a judge. It's usually like one day. I think ours was a 2-day trial, and it's great to get that experience. If you're going to be a trial lawyer, you kind of have a little bit of a running start. But really, the amazing part of it, and what I think is so great about it, is it shows you, hey, do I really want to be a trial lawyer, or do I not? There were people who were gung ho. All they wanted to do was be in the courtroom, and they got up there and they found that, hey, I'm not very good at this, or I really don't like it. And there were people who didn't want anything to do with the courtroom, and they got in there and did it, and they shined. Like, that was their thing. And so I think experiencing as many different things in law school as possible, even if you don't think that you'd be interested in it. One of my favorite classes was negotiable instruments. I didn't even have any idea what it was really whenever I signed up for it, but people said, hey, it's a really good class. And, I never would have taken that class, but I think exposing yourself to a bunch of different things to see, you know what? I didn't think I would like trusts and estates, but I really like it and I'm good at this. So I think that's a huge thing to think about too, as you're going to law school and as you're signing up for your elective classes too.
Yeah, that's a very, very powerful thing to say there. So important just to go out and try the thing, because you'll never really know. You got all these open doors in your life. And sometimes you just got to go through them, see what's on the other side. Of course, you don't really know what's on the other side, but until you try it, you'll know. And like you said, it's very good to know when you get in that trial setting, you're up there giving your opening statement and you're doing depositions or something like that, and you're like, wow, like this is actually really fun, or wow, this is actually terrible. I would never want to do anything like this in my life, which is a totally okay thing to think. Actually, a very good thing to think, because it's something you can steer clear of and you can narrow down your options. Okay, if I don't want to do this now, let's figure something else out.
Yeah.
But going forward in your career, after law school, following law school, you became an associate at Hartline, Dacus, Barger. I'm totally butchering these names. So sorry.
You just say Hartline Dacus.
Hartline, Dacus. Thank you. See, look, I've been short, sweet. But you were there for 4 years. So can you talk about that experience? How did it go? And how is having that first job in the legal field following law school?
Yeah. So, law school teaches you enough to be dangerous. You learn to figure things out, quite frankly. And so when I started on my first day, I really didn't know a whole heck of a lot about products liability. I hadn't even taken products liability in law school. So I looked it up, in some of my torts books and, the restatement of torts and that kind of stuff. But, once again, I had about enough knowledge to be dangerous. But my very first day there, I get there and they're introducing me around, and I get to this conference room and there's 2 lawyers sitting in there, and the conference room has banker's boxes stacked about 5 or 6 high all the way around. And I introduced myself to the partners, and one of them says, you're the Baylor guy, right? And I said, yeah. And he was a Baylor guy too. They both were. He said, what do you know about benzene? And I was like, what's benzene? And he said, well, you're about to find out. And for the next probably 2 months, we sat in that room. I sat in that room. They were in and out of the room. And we were organizing box after box after box of documents. And that first day, I remember sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, John Grisham was right. This is going to be awful. But it wasn't, because I got to spend time with 2 amazing trial lawyers. They were teaching me from basically the get-go, here's how you do this high-level stuff. You got to have a plan. You got to organize, and then you dive in. You don't just dive in because you don't know what you're diving into. And so that was kind of my first big thing that I worked on. And then I got into doing a lot of seat back work for General Motors. And, for a products liability case, they're super expensive. to put together. You got to have a bunch of different experts. And what that means on the personal injury side is you got to have big injuries. Otherwise, you can't justify pursuing a case. And so um, I got to basically, as soon as the ink on my bar card was dry, I was taking depositions. And these weren't just, tiny little car crash cases. These were multi-million dollar cases with people who'd been paralyzed, quadriplegics, people who'd been burned, a lot of family members from people who'd been killed. And it was just pretty heavy stuff. But I was given a whole lot of responsibility really early on. I mean, I think I was taking expert depositions by my second year. I look back and I'm like, I can't believe they trusted me to do that. And so I got a lot of really, really high level experience, and the trial lawyers there were just phenomenal. So I can't think of a better place to have started my career.
So would you say, because sort of, when you're given those large responsibilities very early on in your career, it's very much getting thrown into the fire, getting thrown into the deep end, and it's really sink or swim. So how valuable was it to really get thrown into the deep end like that and just sort of, listen, this is what you got to do, figure it as you can? Like how important was doing that for just yourself personally and your career going forward?
Well, I'll answer that by telling you how we do things at Snelling's Law. Um, you know, we're a figure it out profession, right? That's what lawyers do. That's why we have the careers that we have, and we get paid what we do is because we have a skill set that allows us to solve really, really big problems. That's what I want people focused on. What I don't want people focused on is trying to figure out, how do I save a document? How does this case management system work? And so we really do a lot of training at the firm. We use Trainual, which is basically training software. And so everybody gets kind of that initial training, because I don't want people being inefficient because they don't know how to do stuff. Then as attorneys, I'll kind of go directly with the attorney training. We have a lot of lunch and learns, right? So like initial disclosures. Here's how we do it in this firm. Here's the things that we look for. Here's why we do it this way. Here's things that people miss. Here's when you're looking at these kinds of documents, here's the stuff to be paying attention to. So, there's a lot of training on the things that happen on a day-to-day basis. But at the end of the day, too, one of the things that we really, really believe in is being creative for our clients. And so we want people to bring out that creativity and show us, hey, here's a different way to do it. Here's something that I came up with. What do y'all think? And so there's still a huge figure it out part component, but we try to get as much training done as possible so that they can use their brains on trying to be creative and unique and not just trying to figure something out that has already been done.
So this is more of a business question, but sort
Yeah.
of the way that the Snellings law firm currently works. Of course, you're training up these associates who are just starting out, just coming up in the industry. So how important is it to invest in your employees like that, to invest so much time in training them and getting those wheels on and then eventually taking them off? How important is that to invest in that? Because it is a long-term sort of thing, I would think. But I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah. And in fairness, I don't think we've had anybody, well, that's not true. We don't typically hire right out of law school. We usually have someone with at least a couple of years of experience. But to your question, I think it comes down to culture. I'm a huge, huge, huge believer that everything begins and ends with culture. And for our culture, if you don't train people, that's a culture killer. You have people who run around, they're stressed out, they don't know what to do. I mean, this is a stressful enough profession that if you don't have people trained up, like, what are you doing? And so, yeah, we invest heavily. We are constantly on the lookout for, holes in their knowledge. There's a lot of things, as you have some years and some gray hairs on you as a lawyer, you forget what you didn't know back then. And so even though we try to be really, really cognizant, all of a sudden we'll get a question and, Rocio and I'll look at each other and we'll be like, yeah, they don't have any idea how X works. And so we'll just kind of put on the brakes if it's something that we can teach pretty quickly. Otherwise, we'll schedule a training session and be like, all right, we'll pull all the attorneys in, even the ones that we know how this works, because they may have something to add in too. And so it's really tough because there's just almost zero knowledge on the day-to-day practical stuff as you're coming into the lawyer world. Right? You learn a whole lot in law school, but you can't really graduate law school and hang a shingle and do an amazing job. It always takes a lot of learning.
So, talking, speaking of culture, you talked about culture killers. One being not training up your people because everyone needs to be sort of on the same wavelength per se, and going forward and knowing what they have to do and having that baseline knowledge to be able to go out and do their job as efficient and effectively as possible. But in what ways is culture so important in any given company, but especially for your law firm itself? And what ways have you taken, obviously, training as one of the examples as forming a great culture, but what are some other ways to ensure that you have a great culture? Because there's two sides to the story here. Of course, there's the company culture itself, but there also is when you're interviewing new people, if those people do fit in with the culture, and if they're, and so on and so forth, going back and forth of, does he fit, and do your culture itself within your company fit within his needs and what he wants to do, or he or she, whoever is joining that law firm. So can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about company culture and what ways are you looking to preserve that culture?
Yeah. So first off, we're an EOS firm, entrepreneurial operating systems, Traction, the book Traction. And so kind of as the foundation for culture, we look at three different things. Your vision, right? Where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish here? Your mission, which is why do we exist? There's a whole bunch of personal injury law firms out there. What makes us unique? Why do the communities we serve need us? And then your core values. What makes your firm? Right. And so we did a lot of work putting those three things together. And core values, back before Snellings Law and really even the first few years of Snellings Law, you said the word culture. I mean, I'd zone out. I was like, yeah, whatever, culture. Just be nice to people, treat them well, and there you go. That's all you got to do. Wrong. And so we spent a whole lot of time working on those core values. I mean, the mission and the vision as well, but the core values I think are massive. And so once we identified those core values, we rolled it into everything. So if you were to go look at one of our job ads, it doesn't specifically say here are our core values, but you're going to see at the very top of our job ad when we say, hey, here's the things that we're looking for, here's the things that we don't tolerate, you're going to see our core values all over the place in there. It's going to appeal to some people, it's going to not appeal to other people, and that's perfect. That's what you want. And so, your culture starts with your hiring and your firing. You got to have the right people on the bus. And, when you hire well, that's a huge step in making sure that you're having an amazing firm. But you got to also fire and let people go if they don't meet those core values. Because the ones that don't meet your core values are probably not going to be your top performers because it's just not the right place for them. And they're not going to thrive. And so it's mutually beneficial that they're no longer part of that firm. So you start there. And then, once you have the right people there, you got to train them. You got to make sure that they're in the right seats, that they're thriving in their role. You could have somebody in the wrong role and they're going to be miserable. You put them in the right role and they're an all-star. So you got to do that. You got to hold people accountable. If you don't hold people accountable, then it's not good for them, right? Because they're not going to thrive. It's not good for the business, and it's not good for everybody else because they're going to get frustrated with them. You got to have them. You got to hold them accountable, like through metrics. People have to know where they stand. If you go to work and you don't know if you're doing a good job or not, something's wrong. If you're going to work and you don't know what you're responsible for, something's wrong. And so it has to be really clear, the roles and responsibilities and what is expected of you. So if you're not doing a good job, then, we can see it. We can see it in the metrics, and we'll come to you and be like, hey, what's going on? Is this a capacity issue? Is it a training issue? Is it just you're just not engaged issue? And so we'll work through that. We do quarterly evaluations. We just finished up yesterday, this quarter's evaluations. And so that way we have one-on-one time with them. And we have the ability to figure out issues that maybe they wouldn't bring up in front of the team. And then we also we have a core values channel that we use to keep those core values. So anytime on Slack, So anytime somebody sees a core value being exemplified, they give that person a shout out. And that's one of the things that we talk about in quarterly evaluations. We evaluate you on how are you holding up against our core values. And sometimes people need to refocus on a couple of them. So those are just some ways that we really guard and keep our culture strong in our firm.
So, as you said before, when you first started out, you'd roll your eyes at the company culture. Probably not a necessary thing, but as time went on, you found out that it was. So, where did that mindset switch come from? When did you decide, and when did you discover that, oh my God, like company culture is actually a very, very almost essential part of any given business? Where did that mindset change come from?
Yeah, so I mentioned I was a psychology major. I never stepped foot into a business building. We didn't talk about business in the psychology building. And so I had no idea what I was doing on the business side. I was a good lawyer. Knew my way around a courtroom. I could go try a case. I could work up cases. I was great with clients, but I didn't know anything about business. And so, man, I started reading. I would read. I went to mentors. I asked for their reading lists and kind of developed my own. Like if multiple people recommended a book, that went to the top of the list. And to this day, I'm reading. Before the podcast, I was reading. And so I constantly try to consume to learn. I essentially have, pretty close to a business degree at this point, just based on everything I've read and all the tuition I've paid in terms of dumb stuff I've done. And so, yeah, I started reading, and Traction, huge on culture. Lots of other books, huge on culture. Mastermind, we talk about culture all the time. Conferences that I go to on the business aspect of law, always components of culture. And so, when I had experienced the culture at previous jobs, right, like jobs I worked at growing up, they always had the mission statement or they had values on the wall or whatever. Man, nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what it meant. It was more like a marketing ploy. And so that's the angle I was coming at it from. But once I understood how important it was, then yeah, it's a no-brainer. You have to focus on that. And if you ask anyone on our team, what's my number one job at the firm, they're going to say guard the culture.
Well, I love to hear that. That's a wonderful job to have. I just have to say,
It can be tough. It can be tough.
yeah, I can only imagine how tough it is, but it's a big project. It's a big undertaking, and it goes on and on forever. As long as you have the law firm, you're always constantly going to have to guide that culture. Let's talk about the law firm itself. You became the founder and trial lawyer at Snellings Law Firm in 2017, hanging your own shingle, officially just you, because previously you had hung a shingle with Mr. Burris. But
Mhm.
now you're on your own, and we always love talking about when people open up their own law firm, as it comes with some struggles, some trials, some tribulations. So can you talk about maybe if there was some struggles in opening your own law firm and how it's been so far in having your own law firm?
Yeah. Well, so when I first opened Snelling's Law, it was at a Regis office. It was me and a paralegal. We were in the same office, and she was loud. So we'd never worked together before, and so there was getting her up to speed on the cases that I had. I remember the very first day we met each other there. I mean, I'd interviewed her, but she gets there. The guy with the copier shows up to get things set up. The internet guy's there. The copier guy can't do what he needs to do until the internet guy gets done. I have a photographer to go take pictures for the website, so I got to go downstairs. It's like, Gina, handle all this. And I don't think I turned on my computer to do any work until about 5:30 that night. It was just getting stuff set up and doing this, that, and the other. And that continued for a long time. Doing the business part of the job ate up so much time. I mean, getting insurance, getting postal addresses set up and phone numbers and dealing with the voicemail that gets screwed up and looking at different softwares and all those kinds of things. I did a ton of work before I started, but once you open the door, you realize, oh my gosh, I didn't think about this, or this. You're getting QuickBooks set up and figuring out, okay, how are we gonna do our files? Are we gonna file the same way as I did at the other firm? Or are we gonna use a case management system and all that kind of stuff? So the first year was a whole lot of doing the business stuff and then doing the law stuff at night. And then trying to find clients, right? That's huge. You got to fill the funnel or you're going to starve. You got to have cases to work on. Uh, and then, once we started getting some momentum and I got another, basically kind of an intake specialist that also helped with medical records and things like that. And I moved into my own office. That was my second office at Regis. Then I started having a little bit more breathing room to focus on the business as well as work the cases. But really, it wasn't until Rocio joined, my law partner, that things started to really take off because then I could really focus on more marketing and more. I was handling the pre-lit stuff and she was handling the lit. So it opened up my time quite a bit more to think about how to grow. And then from there, it was just, adding team members.
So, in going forward and opening that law firm, as you said before, 2 months in, you actually got a kidney transplant.
Yeah, there was that too.
Can you talk about that experience that there's so much going on and it's like, oh my God, I have to get a kidney transplant. So what was that like?
Yeah, so back in 2008, I had been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and the doctor put me on these meds. And the meds ended up basically almost shutting down my kidneys. And so my nephrologist took me off the meds immediately, threw me on high dose prednisone, my poor wife, and it saved him for a while. He's like, "You're going to have a kidney transplant at some point, but we're going to try to make these work for as long as we can." And so that lasted, for almost, I guess, for about 9 years. But yeah, as I started coming up on, starting my own firm, my doctor was like, "All right, it's time. I don't want you to on dialysis, so go ask everybody for a kidney." I'm like, "Oh, all right, I'm a pretty independent person. That was not, that's probably one of the harder things I've ever had to do." But man, so many people just went and got tested for me, and it was absolutely amazing. My father-in-law was a match, and my best friend, Jacob Thompson, was a match. And I was in that Regis building when he called me and said, "Hey, I got cleared. Let's do this thing." And so, yeah, Halloween of 2017, which 2 months basically to the day, I handed the keys to my paralegal and was like, "Try not to burn it down while I'm gone." And they rolled us back to do the kidney transplant on Halloween morning of 2017. So I was only in the hospital 3 days. Came back, and we were cloud-based, thankfully, so I could just kind of work from home. But it was a blessing that it happened right then because I wasn't super busy. I didn't have a whole lot of cases to work on. And so, it was just everything worked out.
Well, that's a fantastic story. And of course, shout out to your best friend Jacob there for giving up his kidney of all things. I mean,
Yeah, man, he's awesome. He's my brother.
that is honorable. That is honorable. I never thought of thinking of things in that. I mean, obviously, a lot of people get kidney transplants all the time, but when it's your best friend, that is so meaningful. Thank you.
Yeah, for
Thank you
sure.
to him. God, without him, we wouldn't be talking here with Scott today.
Probably
So,
not.
so you yourself are also a fellow podcaster. You are the host of the Driven Crowd podcast. Driven people going to learn from other driven people. So
Yeah.
why did you decide to start the podcast in the first place? And what do you talk about on there?
Yeah. So, at first it was a way to provide value to potential referral sources. So I meet somebody. Uh, I'm a huge believer that, when it comes to networking, you got to provide value first, right? That's exactly what you're doing, Nate. You're providing value to somebody. You're going to go post this video and you're going to spread the word about Snellings Law, and that's much appreciated. Thank you for that. And I was wanting to do the same thing. And so it's super easy to, when you meet somebody, say, "Hey, you have a really cool story. I'd love to have you on the podcast." And so we do that. We give them swag. We push the podcast out. We pull snippets out. We use those, and we're just trying to get their name and their image everywhere. And so started it that way. And then I started getting more involved on LinkedIn. And man, there's some really amazing people on LinkedIn. And quite frankly, selfishly, I want to learn from them. I want to talk to them. And so I just started asking people to come on the show. And it's been really, really cool. I've learned so much. It's been a lot of fun. I think we just recorded episode 57, maybe 58. So I've been doing it for a few years. And in terms of what we talk about, it's all over the place. We talk about Basically, it's mainly driven people, right? It's the premise. Like, what makes you tick? Um, I, Inspiration came from Tim Ferriss. I love that podcast. So I try to make it Tim Ferriss-esque, Tim Ferriss light, deconstructing people like, hey, how do you approach these kinds of problems? What do you do when somebody comes in and lays this massive problem on your desk? And how do you mentally deal with that? How do you do those kinds of things? What's your routine like? How do you view, if you're a business owner, how are you viewing culture? How are you dealing with these kinds of problems? So, man, it's really, each episode is pretty different depending on who the guest is, but I've just really, really enjoyed that.
As a fellow Tim Ferriss copier myself, I always love to hear that. One of my favorite books ever is The 4 Hour Work Week, of course. I've
Yeah.
read that thing so many times. It is just absolutely amazing book. And of course, his podcast, he's really the goat of podcasting. He's one of them. He's on the Mount Rushmore for sure. Absolutely. And he's been coming out with those double episodes now. I've been loving them so much. They're so God, he's just so good. He really, really is. And he really is what I copied a lot of my podcasts, a lot of my questions. Like at first, you listen to podcasts, you listen for the information. But now as a podcaster, I listen for the questions, I listen for the tone, I listen for what they're really going after. And now I could sort of switch it on you since something that you ask your guests is how do they tick? What makes you tick, Scott?
Man, so it's funny when you have a kidney transplant, it's a pretty big perspective shifter, right? And I kind of answer this the same way that I answer, how do you thank Jacob for that gift, right? I mean, you can't do it with money or gifts or things like that. That's not how he ticks anyway. You do it by getting up every single day and living that day with joy. Even if it's a terrible day, even if you get skunked at court and you get a call that you don't want to answer, all that, it doesn't matter. And so what makes me tick is getting up in the morning, I do my Bible study, I get my workout in, I do my gratitude journal, and then I think about, hey, what's going to make this day amazing? And I try to make that happen. And I love seeing our team thrive. I went from knowing nothing about business to having an absolute passion for it. And so I love getting in there. I love strategy. I love the planning aspect of it. I love the leadership and the training part of it. I love the forecasting of it. And I love learning. And so each day, if I can learn something, if I can help someone, and if I can accomplish something, man, it's an awesome day.
You may not know it now, Scott, but you are so tremendously philosophically in tune. I must say, with your gratitude journal, Bible study, it is all under the canopy of philosophy, and that's what I love to hear. Of course, as a philosophy major myself, I can't hold
Sure, yeah.
myself back. I have to talk about it, of course. But you yourself, you do some speaking engagements. As you know, I love doing my research. And you were actually in Miami recently, which I hope to be there soon enough. But you were at the Genesis Project meeting. You were talking about company culture, I would think. And then you also attended the DTLA, which was in Dallas. You did a summer school CLE. It was actually part two of the conference. So can you talk about those speaking engagements? What do you talk about there? Because I'd love to see Scott Snellings get up on stage and talk about what he wants to talk about.
Yeah, man. I gave you a summary earlier. It was the same presentation at both. It's growing and keeping a fantastic team. And spoiler alert, it all comes back to culture. And so it was basically a more deep dive into what I talked about earlier. So how do we put together our training for our firm? How do we put together our job ads? What's our hiring process? How do we go about firing people? Um, how do metrics work? What kinds of metrics are appropriate for different seats in the firm? DTLA is Dallas Trial Lawyers Association. So a lot of the way we do things would transfer directly to them since it's all trial lawyers. But yeah, I'm super passionate about building amazing businesses. I talk to other law firm owners all the time over coffees or lunches, and I really enjoy that. I really enjoy strategizing, brainstorming with them on how they can make their businesses better, how they can grow their firms. Because as lawyers, you don't really take any business classes in law school. There's, maybe that's changed, but back at, when I was in law school, they don't teach you how to run a business. They don't teach you marketing. They teach you the law. That's what you're there for, right? And Ryan McKean, who's an absolutely amazing thought leader on LinkedIn, he's teaching a class at UConn this year. I forget what he calls it, but it's essentially building a law firm 101. Right? You talk about marketing, you talk about leadership, you talk about culture, you talk about operations, all those things. And so anytime I have an opportunity to speak on that, I jump at it. And anytime I have an opportunity to sit down with another lawyer or other lawyers and brainstorm how to help their business, man, that's my jam. That fills my cup.
Law students, are you feeling overwhelmed, stressed, or short on time in law school? Maybe you just want someone to show you a step-by-step framework to master the topics you're learning in your classes. I know the pressure you're under, and I've got the perfect solution for you. My course, The Law School Operating System, is proven to help you conquer law school with confidence and ease.
Created by Lisa Blasser, a former guest on the podcast and founder of the Law School Success Institute, this course breaks down every subject into manageable main topics that you run through a comprehensive study system to thoroughly prepare you for class and final exams. No more feeling like you need to know everything all at once in the beginning.
But that's not all, Nate. The Law School Operating System also teaches you how to schedule your studying and time effectively. For every topic, you'll know which study step you're on and when you'll complete it every week of your semester. No more mad dash cram sessions, more time with your loved ones. And with my system, you'll walk into your exams knowing you've given 100% of yourself, that there's nothing more you could have done to succeed, and there's no better confidence than that.
Lisa breaks it down like this: one class, one list of main topics, and one system to master each topic. With recorded and live sessions for students available on her website and partnerships with law schools nationwide, the Law School Operating System is here to help you thrive from day one to the final exam. Ready to take control of your law school journey and operate at your full potential in law school? Visit www.lisablasser.com today and enroll in the Law School Operating System. Be sure to use code LSOSNATE10 at checkout for 10% off the recorded course. That is code LSOSNATE10 at checkout. Now, back to the show.
Adds to the rest of the recommendations, all of them, the hundreds that have been given on the podcast so far. But now
they're big in the PI space for sure.
And the PI space. See, I didn't even think about that. I didn't even know that really. But fourth to last question here. This is going to be an interesting question because you're talking about books a lot. So this is live on the Lawyers in the Making podcast. Scott, what are your book recommendations for people? It doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books, something you give a gift to someone.
Probably the books I've given the most are Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. That's an absolute game changer in terms of just kind of taking control of your mindset and losing 110% the victim mentality. Who Not How. I've given that book away a ton. Real game changer in terms of my mindset there too. Instead of having to learn how to do everything, like just hire people that already know how to do it so I can focus on the things I'm really good at. The Gap and the Gain, that's the same authors, Hardy and Sullivan. That one is, especially as attorneys, I think we a lot of us have really driven personalities and we're always kind of striving for the horizon and it never gets any closer. And so this one's talking about, hey, stop and turn around and look at all you've accomplished to this point and live in the present. And so that's a huge one. Traction by Gino Wickman. That's been a game changer for our firm. That's probably implementing EOS has probably been a top 3 business decision that we've made as a firm. So there's 4 for you right there.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect recommendations. I love Jocko Willink. I'm a listener of his podcast, so I love that very much. One of my favorite podcast episodes ever is him and Tim Ferriss very, very early on. I think it was I think it was episode 50.
That was the first one he did.
Yeah, that was the first public one. Or he went on Tim's podcast, and that was his first interview ever that really put him on the map. And then Tim came on his, and that was a crazy conversation because Tim gets deep. They're like, we're going into the darkness. I'm like, oh, I love that stuff. So he was going on and on about all his life experiences. I go back and listen to it all the time because it's just inspiring, absolutely inspiring. But Scott, I think you talk about living in the present. I'm going to get you onto something. philosophy books. I think you'll like them. I think you'll like them. I'll turn the key there, see what I can do, see
I'll
what kind
read
of
it.
recommendations I could give for you. But if I had to give one, I mean, Tim Ferriss talks about it. Letters to Lucilius by Seneca. I think you'd really like that one. I don't know if you've ever read it, but that's a really good one. I love that one. One of my favorite books ever. But the last question here, Scott. What are the types of things you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis? Either that be through social media, so through Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Reddit, YouTube, any Substacks you read, any newsletters you subscribe to, any podcasts you would recommend. What is crossing the transom of Scott's mind on a daily basis?
Yeah, I mean, I do my absolute best to stay off of social media. I mean, if you're on my personal social media, I don't think I ever post on it. I will check in like maybe twice throughout the day on the firm social media just to see what's going on. If there's anything that I'm not in charge of it, so I don't even need to respond to stuff. I just like to see what we're putting out there. So in case somebody asks me, like, "Oh, I saw this picture such and such," I want to know what they're talking about. Um, so kind of my routine is in the morning. I get up and I do my Bible study, right? So I want that first thing that helps me get me centered for the day. Depending on the day, I'll then read. I usually have a couple of books going at once. Usually a business book. I don't read those at night because that just gets my mind going. A fiction book. That's usually what I'll read at night if I'm going to read anything at night. And then I may have like some sort of book on Christianity or something along those lines going too. And then I don't really pay a ton of attention to the news. I get an email. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, it's the year of the printing press. I remember that it's like 14 something. Uh, it's basically just some quick headlines as to what's going on. It's 1440 Daily Digest in a very neutral way. It's just, hey, here's the facts of what happened. Because the political stuff drives me absolutely insane. So I'll catch up on what's going on in the world on that one. It's a super quick read. And then podcast wise, obviously Tim Ferriss. I like Huberman Labs. That's a good one. Um, I'll listen to the Bible recap. I like the Bible Project podcast. Those guys are really good. And I have a bunch of friends that have podcasts, right? So Charlie Mann has. They don't teach you this in law school. That's really good. Lunch Hour Legal Marketing with Conrad and Guy. And man, there's several others. A lot of times I'll follow the guests, so I look at LinkedIn. So I do use LinkedIn quite a bit. And if I see that somebody I want to hear from has been on a podcast, then I'll listen to that podcast. And so that's really kind of how I consume. At night, when I'm hanging out with the kiddos, I'm usually consuming, we try to do our reading time together. But if they're watching something, it's usually whatever the kids are watching, which typically don't have any interest in whatsoever. And then once the kids go to bed, the wife is into the true crime stuff like you. And so I end up watching pieces of those things as well because I go to bed early since I get up so early.
Well, those are all great recommendations. Of course, I love the Huberman Labs. That's a great
Yeah,
recommendation. That's where I learned I should leave Albany and get away from the clouds and go sit in the sun a little bit
got to
more.
get the sunshine.
I gotta get my circadian cycle on track here, and
Yeah,
the clouds of Albany are not letting me do it. So hopefully they
no. I
way.
listened to the Casey Means one and went out and bought the book Good Energy, and that's a game changer book too.
I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, he started releasing like the bulk podcast where it was basically on one topic. So I know, I think it was Matthew something. He was like the sleep guy. And I listened
Yeah,
to the whole 8 hour sleep guy. And now I'm like, now I know pretty much everything that need to know about sleep. Get away from the lights, no phone 30 minutes before bed.
yep.
There's like all these little quick facts that I now know everything about sleep. But it's so valuable podcast because of course, your body, your mind are the most important things. So you could be such a successful and driven person. It all starts with you at the end of the day. But second to last question here, Scott. You're working, you're getting up early, you got the Snellings law firm. But what is an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Scott?
Hmm. Well, Friday night right now it's football season here in Texas, and my senior is in the band. So love going and watching high school football in Texas. Her band, she's in the Allen Escadrille, and I think there are like 600 kids between the band and the drill team and the color guard. And so it's absolutely amazing to watch that performance. So that's pretty ideal during football season. If it's not during football season, well, so right now I'm training for a marathon, and my long run is Saturday morning. So Friday night is just kind of out, right? There's no fun stuff going on. So I'll switch to like Saturday night, date night with the wife. And so ideal date night for the wife would be babysitter, go grab dinner down by the AAC, and then go to a Stars game. We're big Stars fans, Dallas Stars. So that would be an ideal night. Sunday morning, that's my morning where I get to sleep in just a little bit. I get to sleep until 7 and then get up, uh, grab the kids, go serve at church. We're greeters there. And then my wife comes, and then after church, go grab lunch with some friends, and then come home, watch the Cowboys play. That can be ideal or not so ideal. Usually Sundays, I go for like a nice walk in the neighborhood because my legs hurt from the long run before, and just relax, really relax. And then at some point, we'll pull up the computer and kind of look at what's ahead for the week. I usually do that on Friday afternoon at work too, and just kind of refresh. Okay, yeah, I got this going on, and that way I know what's ahead. And there's no anxiety or anything like that. I just, hey, here's what's going to happen next week.
The only Sunday scaries is that Cowboys game. That's it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And training for I mean, that is just absolutely spectacular that you're training for a marathon. I wish you the best of luck with that stuff. You're gonna do absolutely amazing, beat the world record or something like that.
That is not going to be happening, but yeah, I've never been a runner. I had my good friend kind of got me into it. He got me to sign up for a 10K, and then like can't remember if it got rained out or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, let's just do the half marathon. We're already training." I'm like, "Okay." And so I'm running 13 miles. I was like, "Why am I doing this?" And then I ended up doing it again the next year. And then my business coach, I always say he talked me into signing up for the marathon. And so he's going to do it with me out in DC at the end of October. So we're getting close, man. I'm about week 16 into the grind, and I'm ready for the race to be here.
I actually I can't imagine. I've never run a marathon in my life. Hopefully I do one day. I definitely will. You've inspired me, Scott. I've had people come on here talk about marathon running. So it is a commitment, but it's a good commitment. I would assume you're in great shape right now.
It's a massive commitment. It's the mental part of it, right? I mean, the running's hard. Like you're sitting there running 8 miles in the middle of the week. I just did my first 20-mile run last weekend, so it's definitely a physical commitment, but it's way more of a mental commitment.
I see. Those are the important things I got to know for the future when I'm looking to go on my marathon run.
Don't wait till you're 47 years old to do it either.
Yeah, that's good. I get the young legs. I'm only 21, so I got some golden years ahead of me that I could get
There
my
you go.
marathon. But it's still at 47, I will still be looking to run that marathon just like yourself, Scott. If you could do it, I could do it. And of course, everyone out there,
Right.
they could do it as well. Everyone will
Yeah.
be running marathons because of you, Scott, I swear. But last question here, since that's the end of every single episode. But Scott, what are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
Words of wisdom. So I think confidence is everything. Confidence in yourself, having the right mindset, and just taking control of your life. You're not a victim. Go read Extreme Ownership, and it doesn't matter if you bomb the LSAT. Just because you bomb the LSAT doesn't mean you're not smart. Or doesn't mean you wouldn't make a good lawyer. Doesn't matter if you bomb that first test in law school. You got to figure out how to do it. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to make a great lawyer. Performance in law school doesn't mean you're going to be an amazing or a terrible lawyer. And I think believing in yourself and being willing to put yourself out there and do challenging things, as Clay Speakman, one of my buddies, says, do hard things on purpose. Put yourself out there. You're going to fail. Pick yourself up. Go fail again. And that's for anything in life, whether it's law school, whether it's relationships, whether it's trying to run a marathon, doesn't matter. Put yourself out there. Go do the hard things and learn.
Well, Scott, that is beautifully said. And as a terrible poker player myself, I know more than anything that the greatest bet you can make is the bet on yourself.
For
But
sure.
Scott, that is the episode. That is the podcast. So thank you so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom and spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check us out, lawyersofthemaking.substack.com. That's lawyersofthemaking, one word, substack.com. and I will see you all in the next one.